There's a vicious cycle of shame that happens when you are trying to make positive changes in your life and shift a harmful behavior to a beneficial one. You know that you're trying to move from something harmful to something positive, and you instinctively think that your goal is to never have that negative thought, tendency, craving, or whatever it is anymore immediately. In other words, since you know that you want to change a behavior, you see any instance of that behavior as a failure on your part, and that triggers a shame cycle that is unhelpful. If you're trying to quit smoking, for example, you know that your goal is to not smoke and to not have the cravings for cigarettes and all that. And so any time you get a craving or any time that you give in and have a cigarette, you believe that you failed and you feel shame around it. This is a self-perpetuating cycle, though, because your habit of smoking is actually a response to uncomfortable emotions in the first place. If you've read Alan Carr's famous book, Easy Way to Stop Smoking, you'll know that the physical dependence and addiction to smoking isn't actually half as strong as you think it is. The whole reason you are still smoking, even though at least some large part of you knows that you don't want to smoke anymore, is because smoking is one of the ways that you help yourself avoid feeling certain uncomfortable emotions. Stress, overwhelm, worry, guilt, shame, etc. These are all things that make you uneasy, and smoking gives a quick, pleasurable nicotine fix and dopamine release that helps cover up that emotional distress that you are otherwise experiencing. Smoking is, primarily, a method of avoidance and/or soothing for emotional discomfort. It helps you handle uncomfortable emotional situations, albeit in a harmful and ultimately unhelpful way. So, when we give ourselves any shame, doubt, or guilt around the things that we are not doing perfectly, while we are in fact trying to change that very behavior, we reinforce a negative emotional cycle that is going to keep you doing that thing over and over and over again. To put it simply, if you allow yourself to feel guilty because you smoked, then that feeling of guilt will reinforce your urge to smoke. So then you'll smoke, and you'll feel guilty, and you'll smoke, and you'll feel guilty, etc. It goes around forever unless we actively take control of it. We need to end this negative shame cycle so that you can actually and finally change the behavior that you're ashamed of. If we focus only on changing the behavior without also changing the emotions, then we will never escape the cycle. But if we focus on changing the emotions first, then we will begin to lessen the urge for the bad behavior altogether because we don't need to cover up uncomfortable emotions. The goal is for us to confront our guilt and shame first so that we can feel more free and comfortable to stop smoking, not to try and eliminate the guilt by ending the bad behavior first. We need to begin by focusing on the emotions, which means that we need to end this cycle of guilt and shame we give ourselves for failing. In order to do this, we need to shift some beliefs about our bad behavior. One thing I tell my clients all the time as they move through my 8-week course on self-love and shadow work is that, so long as you are continuing on your path and making efforts, there is no such thing as failure anymore. And I do mean that quite literally. It's not just some motivational phrase I use to pump them up and give them strength. There is no such thing as failure. Chapter 2b. Why is there no such thing as failure? Well, let's take a quick look at how we perceive failure in a situation like this. First, let's understand and agree that you can't possibly intentionally change a behavior that you are unaware of, right? By definition, you can't intentionally do something that you're not consciously aware of and actively choosing. And when it comes to reprogramming subconscious behavior, this reprogramming must be done intentionally. You can't change something that you are doing subconsciously without placing conscious attention onto that behavior. Let's say you have a habit of sighing after every time you take a sip of coffee, but you've never noticed that before in your life until your spouse points it out to you one day. Now, every time you do it, you notice it, and you feel weird, strange, uncomfortable, or ashamed, and you want to change this behavior. You didn't used to realize you were doing it, but now you can't help but notice it. Until your spouse pointed it out to you, it would have been completely impossible for you to make any efforts to change this behavior.